The Theric Imperium submitted its victory record at the exact moment every human receiver inside the Eidolon record hall went silent. Not broken, not jammed, not cut off by tribunal security, but silent in the ancient emergency pattern every human station knew by instinct, the kind of silence that meant ordinary systems had stopped asking permission and had begun listening for something buried deeper than law. Above the tribunal floor, the Imperium's iron banners unfolded in a ring of cold red light, declaring the Haven thread destroyed, its convoy neutralized, its alleged threat removed from civilized space. Then the only human in the hall rose from the lowest witness tier. Rhea Darson did not look like the answer to an empire. She wore no command uniform, no medals, no armored escort, and no ceremonial blade. Her title was announced as Remembrance Advocate, and several Theric officers gave the faint, dry clicks their species used when amusement was too small to deserve laughter. To them, she was a record keeper sent by a wounded species to complain after losing. To the Eidolon judges, she was a legal witness permitted to challenge a submitted history before it became a permanent truth. To humanity, she was something far older than either of those things, but no one in that hall understood that yet. Grand Marshal Orzith Rune stood beneath the floating record sphere with his plated hands folded behind his back, tall, still, and certain. His fleet had struck the Haven thread beyond the Grey Ward Reach, where civilian vessels crossed under medical markings and refugee lights. His claim was simple enough for frightened governments to accept. Humanity had hidden operational infrastructure inside protected ships. The Imperium had acted. The route had been cleared. The record would show that the strike was lawful, controlled, and necessary. Rhea placed one hand on the witness rail and asked the Eidolon judges to delay acceptance of the record for 8 minutes. The request moved through the hall like a small insult. 8 minutes could not bring back a convoy. 8 minutes could not summon a navy across restricted space. 8 minutes could not rewrite sensor logs sealed under Imperial authority. Orzith allowed it with visible patience, making sure the watching species saw the Imperium as generous even after victory. During the first minute, nothing happened. During the third, a Theric scout beacon in the Grey Ward Reach stopped updating. During the fifth, 9 Imperium cruisers froze on the tactical registry. By the 8th minute, every red military marker near the shattered Haven thread had gone motionless. No explosion appeared. No human warship crossed the border. No weapon flare lit the dark. The Theric vessels simply stopped, as if the machinery of conquest had suddenly found itself inside a hand it could not break. The amusement vanished from Orzith's face one layer at a time. When the delay ended, Rhea looked up at the record sphere and spoke with a calm that made the hall colder. The Haven thread was not defenseless because humanity was weak. It was defenseless because it carried something no sane civilization would ever choose to attack. Then the first surviving transmission reached the Eidolon record hall, and the tribunal's own translators refused to classify it as military data. The transmission arrived as a pale green pulse, thin as a breath and uneven as a failing heartbeat. The Eidolon system tried to label it as wreckage telemetry. The label collapsed. It tried distress residue. That collapsed too. It tried civilian preservation matter, then halted completely, as if the oldest record engine in known space had found a thing that belonged to life and death at the same time. Rhea said nothing. Her silence did more damage than any speech could have done. Grief could be dismissed. Anger could be managed. But patience, calm and prepared, suggested that humanity had not come to beg for sympathy. Humanity had come with a structure already in motion. Orzith stepped forward before the silence could turn against him. He repeated the Imperium's position in a voice polished by centuries of conquest. The Haven thread had traveled through disputed shadow space. The ships had refused inspection. Its mass signatures were masked. Its internal systems carried encrypted human architecture. No ancient power, he said, could allow a younger species to hide strategic assets behind refugee markings. Several neutral delegates looked down. The language was effective because it was familiar, lawful, necessary, controlled. Rhea had seen those words in old human archives, attached to burned cities, forced marches, broken treaties, and graves that were later called unfortunate outcomes. She allowed Orzith to keep speaking because some lies needed room to reveal their shape. Chief Record-Keeper Luthen Amais turned toward Rhea and asked the question the Hall was waiting for. Did humanity deny that encrypted systems existed aboard the Haven thread? Rhea answered clearly. No. The Hall changed. The Theric officers straightened. Smaller delegations withdrew emotionally before their bodies moved. Sympathy became caution. If humanity had hidden something inside a protected convoy, then the matter was no longer simple. It became a debate, and empires were very good at turning dead civilians into debates. Orzith almost smiled. He said the Imperium regretted civilian losses, but no species could place military infrastructure among children and then call itself innocent. It was the perfect trap. If Rhea denied it, the logs would bury her. If she justified it, the Imperium would call it confession. Rhea looked at the green pulse trembling inside the record sphere. Then she told them what the encrypted system was. It was called the Shelter Seed Mandate. The name landed softly, almost too softly. Some delegates looked confused. Some looked disappointed. They had expected a weapon, a defense code, a hidden command lattice. Instead, the name sounded like farms, homes, emergency shelters, and hands building something after storms. That was their mistake. They did not understand that humans often gave gentle names to the things they would defend with terrifying force. The Shelter Seed Mandate was not combat intelligence. It was a distributed civilian recovery system installed on refugee ships, medical carriers, agricultural barges, engineering platforms, and family transports. If a habitat lost air, Shelter Seed designed temporary pressure webs. If water networks failed, it mapped replacement lines. If children were separated from guardians, it preserved identity chains until family, community, or legal caretakers could be found. It existed because humans had learned that rescue was not finished when bodies were pulled from danger. Rescue was finished when people had names, warmth, food, records, and somewhere to return. The Theric legal envoy objected that any system capable of rebuilding civilian infrastructure could support military logistics. Rhea agreed, and that agreement struck harder than denial. Yes, any system that could rebuild a school could rebuild a command post. Any ship carrying medicine could carry soldiers. Any road that fed refugees could move armies. If the Imperium's argument was that usefulness made life a target, then it had not proven the Haven thread was military. It had admitted that human survival itself offended them. The record sphere began accepting the green files. Vessel registries appeared. Passenger chains. Seed vault inventories. School rosters. Medical transfer lists. Cultural memory banks. Repair templates. Refugee relocation permissions. Not one file proved an invasion. Together, they proved something more dangerous to the Imperium's claim. The Haven thread had been carrying the future of people who had already lost too much. Then sound emerged from the pulse. A child was counting slowly in the background. An adult voice, strained but steady, told passengers in Nursery Section 3 to breathe in rhythm and wait for the lights to return. The Eidolon system muted the audio after 4 seconds because an emotional contamination alert activated. That alert had not appeared in the record hall for nearly a century. Luthen Amais asked how many memory packets had survived. Rhea kept her eyes on the sphere. She said humanity did not know yet. The Haven thread had scattered its final records before impact, and human receivers across the Greyward Reach were still waking. Some packets would contain names. Some would contain final messages. Some would contain things no court was ready to hear. Orzith asked how many receivers existed. Rhea turned toward him at last. Enough. Enough was not a number, and that was why it frightened them. Numbers could be reduced, challenged, delayed, buried in committees, or softened by diplomatic phrasing. Enough meant the records were already moving outside the Imperium's reach. Enough meant the first version of history no longer belonged to the empire that had rushed to write it. The Eidolon record hall dimmed the Theric banners and expanded the human transmission until fragments hung above the chamber like pieces of a broken constellation. The judges had not ordered the system to continue. They did not have to. The record hall had been built to preserve contradiction, and now contradiction had arrived covered in civilian light. The first fragment opened into a school roster from the refugee vessel Quiet Vale. 86 children had been transferred from an unstable moon settlement, each record attached to temporary guardians, learning needs, language preferences, medical notes, and small personal details. One child hated loud doors. One needed stories before sleep. One carried a yellow thread bracelet made by a grandmother who had not survived evacuation. None of it had tactical value unless a civilization believed tenderness itself was a threat. The Theric envoy objected that emotional records were prejudicial. Luthen Amais asked whether the Imperium wished to remove emotional language from its own victory claim, where it had described human expansion as reckless, destabilizing, and dangerous. The envoy fell silent. The Imperium had used fear as evidence when it served power. Now the wounded were answering with memory. A second fragment unfolded from the medical ship Ansa Remedy. It contained the emergency work log of Dr. Vela Sorn, who had continued surgery rotation after the first strike wave breached the convoy's rear line. The file showed no grand speech, no battlefield glory. It showed triage decisions, blood loss estimates, oxygen rationing, and one repeated instruction. Unidentified patients were to be marked by voice sample and physical detail, so no survivor would become nameless. Her final note asked whoever found the file to locate the mother of patient 12. The hall stayed silent. Not with respect exactly. Respect was too clean a word. The silence had weight. It pressed on every delegation that had entered expecting a legal dispute and now found itself watching humans organize dignity inside disaster. The third fragment came from a maintenance worker named Heron Soul. He had been aboard the agricultural freighter Greenwell 12, carrying soil cultures, medicinal algae, pollinator larvae, and food chain templates for frontier settlements. When the oxygen spine fractured, Heron crawled into the damaged section and braced a manual seal with his own body until emergency foam hardened around him. 91 passengers survived because he stayed where the air was leaving. Rhea let them watch. She needed them to understand that human strength was not only found in warships. It was found in tired hands writing down names, in doctors working past exhaustion, in workers sealing doors from the wrong side, in children breathing slowly in the dark because someone had told them they were not alone. Orzeth stepped forward again, but his certainty had thinned. He said the Imperium did not deny civilian presence. The issue remained whether strategic systems were hidden among them. He was no longer trying to prove the convoy was military. He was trying to prove it was military enough. Rhea activated the legal marker beneath her palm. A small white-blue spark flashed under her skin. The record sphere recognized Human Civil Emergency Authority and opened the shelter seed files fully. The fragments aligned. They did not form a battle map. They formed a reconstruction web. Medical ships held hospital templates. Agricultural vessels held food recovery systems. Engineering carriers held atmospheric repair models. School transports held identity chains, language records, and placement frameworks. Cultural banks held music, law, family trees, local histories, and community agreements. The Haven thread was not hiding an invasion. It was carrying the instructions for rebuilding the home. Then the record hall found the hidden layer. At the center of the green web, a black chamber appeared. Rhea had not opened it. Orzeth saw it at the same time she did. The chamber was sealed under Emergency Child Protection Authority and marked with a phrase no translator could soften. For the missing young. The black chamber did not open when Rhea touched her authority marker again. It did not even acknowledge her. The Eidolon system tested origin, ownership, encryption age, legal status, and emotional density, but every attempt returned the same impossible classification. Human, civilian, protected, and still alive. Still alive, I changed the room. Records were supposed to be past tense. Dead ships, completed events, preserved testimony. But this file was updating from somewhere beyond the hall. Somewhere in the Greyward Reach, the Haven thread had left behind more than wreckage. Orzeth noticed the danger before most of the tribunal did. Empires could survive accusation. They could survive grief. They could even survive guilt if guilt could be delayed long enough. What they could not survive easily was an unknown record still growing outside their control. Luthen Amais ordered the black chamber isolated. The record sphere obeyed for less than a heartbeat. Then the shelter seed mandate pulled the chamber deeper into the civilian web, hiding it beneath thousands of identity chains. The system was not merely presenting evidence. It was protecting it. The Theric envoy demanded suspension of proceedings. He claimed the record had been contaminated by autonomous human systems. Several trade-bound delegations supported him immediately, not because they believed in the Imperium, because the Theric controlled passage lanes, mineral access, and defense guarantees. Truth was powerful, but fuel shipments were real. Medicine shipments were real. Border protections were real. Smaller species had survived for generations by knowing when not to look too closely. Rhea understood the next attack. The Imperium had failed to erase the dead, so it would now frighten the living into silence. Orzith addressed the hall, warning that accepting uncontrolled human records could destabilize the Grey Ward Reach. He warned of trade collapse, border panic, treaty failure, and the danger of allowing a young species to weaponize grief. His voice was calm, and that calm began doing what the first strike had failed to do. It made some species look away. Rhea asked the record hall to display the receiver map. The ceiling became a field of stars. Across the darkness, human lights appeared one by one. Mining shelters, water stations, medical docks, refugee homes, ice haulers, repair moons. Tiny civilian receivers hidden in places no Imperial strategist would consider important. Dozens became hundreds. Hundreds became thousands. Luthen asked how many were outside Eidolon jurisdiction. Rhea answered that almost all of them were. The Haven thread had been designed for territories where governments failed, where treaties moved slowly, where official help arrived after children had already gone cold. Its memory packets did not seek permission from capitals. They sought anyone willing to remember. If one receiver died, 10 copied the record. If 10 were silenced, 100 woke farther out. Before anyone could respond, a red emergency signal cut across the starfield. Theric reinforcement groups had entered the Grey Ward Reach. Their vectors were not aimed at human warships. They were not aimed at military stations. They were aimed at the civilian receivers. The hall erupted. Orzith's officers denied authorization. Smaller delegations demanded clarification. Luthen called for order, but the record hall enlarged the map instead, showing the red Theric vectors slicing toward the green human lights like blades moving toward sleeping witnesses. Rhea did not move. That frightened them most, because now every observer understood that she had known this might happen. The shelter seed mandate had not simply preserved memory after the first crime. It had anticipated the second. Then the immobilized Theric ships near the wreckage began broadcasting. At first, Orzith seemed to think his command channels had returned. But the signals were not orders. They were internal combat logs, bridge recordings, target confirmations, civilian classification alerts, strike approvals. The Theric vessels were opening their own memories into the Eidolon stream because pieces of shelter seed witness code had embedded themselves in the wreckage they had flown through. The first translated bridge log appeared above the chamber. Civilian markers confirmed. Convoy continuing evacuation pattern. Awaiting final authorization to fire. Every observer turned toward Orzith. The black chamber unlocked its first seal. The first seal did not open into a casualty list. It opened into live space. The Grey Ward Reach returned above the hall, but the map was different now. Around the silent Theric ships, new signatures appeared. They were not military. That was the first thing every commander in the room noticed. Their hulls were too broad, too patched, too slow, too uneven. Their heat patterns were wasteful. Their formations were ugly. They looked less like a fleet and more like an entire frontier had torn itself loose and flown into the dark. Then the record hall sharpened the projection. Hospital carriers, grain haulers, mining rigs, water tankers, refugee shelters with engines welded to their backs, salvage platforms, fuel frames, construction barges. Civilian stations that had no business moving at all were moving, locking themselves around the trapped Theric strike group. A Theric officer made a sound close to laughter, then stopped as the pattern was calculated. It was a cage, not a naval blockade, not a weapons formation, a containment structure made from tools meant to rescue people. Gravity anchors from mining rigs blocked escape corridors. Hospital shields formed safe lanes through debris. Agricultural vessels vented water into reflective clouds to blind targeting systems. Salvage platforms extended braces into shattered wreckage. The whole structure looked improvised until the record hall measured it. Then everyone saw the truth. The shelter seed mandate had not called soldiers first. It had called builders. That revelation moved through the hall with more force than a threat. The galaxy had expected human power to mean bigger guns, faster ships, louder vengeance. Instead, humanity's first answer to atrocity had been containment, rescue, evidence, and restoration. The Imperium had attacked civilians and discovered that human civilians were not passive matter waiting to be saved. They were infrastructure with a heartbeat. Rhea told the tribunal that no human navy had crossed a lawful engagement distance. No battleship had fired. No admiral had issued an attack order. The vessels surrounding the Theric fleet belonged to the civilian recovery network awakened by Shelter Seed. Orzith stared at the projection as though refusing to understand might make it vanish. Inside the containment zone, rescue craft were already cutting through Haven thread wreckage. They moved carefully, marking bodies, stabilizing compartments, retrieving memory cores, and searching sealed sections where life signs might still exist. It was not triumphant work. It was intimate, slow, and sacred in a way battle never was. Then the first survivor marker appeared. One green pulse near the wreckage of the medical carrier Ansa Remedy. Then 4. Then 11. A sealed emergency compartment had drifted behind a shattered thermal shield. A rescue platform named Patient Stone locked onto it and began warming the hull. The record hall displayed oxygen remaining. 19 minutes. For the first time, Rhea's calm almost broke. Not enough for the Imperium to use, but enough for the hall to feel the human being beneath the advocate. Every legal argument became smaller. Someone was still alive in the place Orzith had called neutralized. Orzith ordered the nearest reinforcement group to advance. The command entered the Eidolon stream because the Theric ship logs were now mirrored through Shelterseed witness keys. Everyone heard it. Everyone saw the red vectors tighten toward the receiver network and the civilian rescue cage. The human-civilian net responded without firing. Mining rigs released synchronized gravity anchors. Water haulers burst reflective vapor across targeting paths. Hospital carriers widened shield membranes until their hulls trembled. Fuel stations ignited reserve cores into temporary suns, lighting the wreckage so cutters could keep working. The ugly, impossible human structure became one living machine. If the Imperium fired now, it would hit civilian rescue vessels on a live galactic record while survivors were being pulled from the dead. Orzith understood the trap at last. Humanity had not only stopped his ships. Humanity had placed his next choice in front of every witness that mattered. Then the black chamber opened its second seal. A list appeared. Missing children. Incomplete identity chains. Last known locations. Broken Guardian links. Unrecovered nursery compartments. At the bottom of the list, one signal was still updating. A child was alive, and the Theric reinforcement ships were moving directly toward her. The child's signal changed the proceeding because it was no longer possible to pretend the tribunal was judging the past. The past could be debated. The past could be translated, framed, and softened. This was not past. This was a living pulse inside a dead convoy, blinking beneath fractured metal while Imperial ships advanced toward the wreckage. The record hall magnified the signal until the ceiling held only one image. A broken nursery section drifting beyond the main debris field, its hull split open along one side, its emergency beacon still pulsing green. The partial identity chain appeared. Name uncertain. Estimated age 7. Guardian status unknown. Medical risk: cold exposure, dehydration, oxygen depletion. Last recorded personal object: orange cloth bird. The orange cloth bird broke something in the hall. It had no strategic value. could not be a weapon, could not justify a strike. It could only belong to a child young enough to believe that holding one soft thing might keep the dark from becoming complete. The Theric legal envoy tried to claim fabrication. He said humanity had demonstrated distributed memory manipulation. He said the signal was emotional pressure. Rhea did not answer. The record hall overlaid the child's location with Theric targeting data from the original strike. The coordinates matched. Luthen Amais asked whether the Imperium wished to formally challenge the authenticity of its own combat logs. No Theric voice replied. At the border, the reinforcement formation crossed the final warning perimeter. Human civilian vessels broadcast rescue status, oxygen estimates, and the child's weakening pulse. The Theric ships kept moving. The survival probability dropped from 42% to 36%, then 31%, then 28%. Then new human signatures appeared beyond the edge of the map. Still not the Navy. Old generation carriers. Decommissioned colony arcs. Long-haul water vessels. Repair habitats brought back from retirement. Ships so old their registrations predated humanity's full recognition under galactic transit law. They entered the Greyward Reach towing shield plates, pressure tents, emergency habitat shells, and engine cores. They were too slow to have arrived because of the tribunal. They had started moving long before Orzith submitted his victory record. Karuin's replacement? No, this was Orzith, and he understood before the judges did. Humanity had not reacted to the record. Humanity had expected the record. The receivers, the witness keys, the civilian cage, the old ships, the rescue paths. All of it had awakened from the first breath of disaster. Not panic. Doctrine. Luthen turned to Rhea and asked when Shelter Seed had activated. Rhea answered quietly, 13 seconds after the first Haven thread vessel lost pressure. The hall went still. 13 seconds. Before the Imperium announced victory. Before the record hall received its claim. Before Orzith stood beneath banners. While civilians were still dying, humanity had already begun calling builders, waking receivers, preserving evidence, tracing survivors, and turning attempted erasure into testimony. The child's oxygen estimate dropped to 11 minutes. Orzith lifted one hand. Every Theric officer in the hall froze because they knew that gesture. It was fleet authority. Somewhere in the Greyward Reach, the advancing reinforcements received a priority order. Before the command was executed, the record hall flashed black. Shelter Seed intercepted it through the witness keys and held it unopened in the center of the tribunal, asking for classification. If the order was withdrawn, the Imperium still had a path back. If it was attacked, it would become a permanent record before it became action. For 3 seconds, even Orzith did not move. Then the sealed order opened. Purge all unauthorized recovery assets inside the witness field. The record hall linked the order to the first strike logs, the receiver map, the child's pulse, the civilian rescue ships, the false victory record, and every denial spoken by the Imperium since the proceeding began. The iron banners above the hall fractured. The official Theric submission broke into rejected fragments. At the border, civilian ships moved between Theric guns and the nursery section. And behind them, for the first time, the darkness filled with blue human military signatures. The human fleet did not advance. It appeared beyond lawful distance like a second horizon, thousands of blue signatures holding still behind miners, doctors, farmers, engineers, water carriers, and old colony arcs. The court understood the message without anyone explaining it. Humanity had let its civilians save life first. Its soldiers had waited behind them, silent, disciplined, and terrible. Orzith looked at the map and knew the Imperium had been placed inside a moral cage tighter than any gravity net. If his ships fired, they would not be striking a military formation. They would be firing through rescue vessels into a nursery wreck while the entire record hall watched, while human warships stood ready with every legal reason they needed. The Blue Fleet opened no fire. Its weapons remained sealed. That restraint frightened the hall more than rage would have. Rage could be reckless. Restraint meant control. Then the sovereign strategist of the Theric Imperium entered by emergency projection. His name was Velmer Octaran, and his image descended above Orzith in a column of black iron light, larger than the judges, larger than the witness rail, larger than the truth he had come to crush. He did not look at the child's signal. He looked at the shattered Theric record and spoke as if reality had insulted him. He declared the proceeding corrupted by human emotional warfare. He declared Shelter Seed an illegal intelligence weapon. He declared the immobilized Theric vessels victims of civilian piracy. He declared the child's signal unverified, the logs unlawfully extracted, and the receiver network hostile propaganda. Rhea let him speak. That unsettled him more than interruption would have. Her silence made him spend every prepared defense until only avoidance remained. When he finished, the child had 8 minutes of oxygen. Rhea asked the record hall to place Velmer's statement beside the recovered strike authorization. The two records appeared together. On one side, Velmer claimed civilian status was unclear. On the other, Theric targeting logs confirmed civilian markers before firing. On one side, he claimed humanity escalated. On the other, the human fleet held fire while civilian ships shielded a rescue. On one side, he called Shelter Seed a weapon. On the other, human rigs were cutting survivors from wreckage. The comparison lasted half a minute. It destroyed the room's ability to pretend complexity remained. Luthen Amais asked whether the Imperium wished to amend its record. Velmer understood the trap. To amend was to confess. To refuse was to be rejected. So he chose the old Imperial path. He threatened the room. Trade protections would be reviewed. Border guarantees would be suspended. Defense treaties would be reconsidered. Species supporting humanity would be treated as hostile to Theric security interests. The hall felt fear move through it again, real and heavy. Many of those species depended on Theric routes for medicine, food, fuel, and migration passage. The Imperium was counting on survival instinct to defeat truth. Then the small Maruvi delegation stood. They were not a warrior species. They had no fleet large enough to frighten anyone. Their ambassador's voice shook as she withdrew support for the Theric record. Then the Elson Water League stood. Then the Coram Station houses. Then the ancient Polari who had not broken neutrality in generations. One by one, frightened species did not become fearless. They simply decided fear was no longer enough reason to lie. Velmer's projection seemed suddenly too large for him. At the border, the rescue craft reached the nursery section. The cutting beam touched the frozen seam. 7 minutes remained. Rhea read Earth's terms into the tribunal record. The Imperium would rebuild every destroyed vessel family of the Haven thread. It would open all command archives related to the strike. It would return every captured survivor. It would fund protected refugee corridors under Eidolon oversight. It would recognize Shelter Seed as civilian preservation infrastructure. It would accept that the Haven thread had been protected movement, unlawfully attacked and falsely recorded. No demand for homeworld surrender. No extermination. No occupation. Only accountability large enough to match the harm. Velmer called it humiliation. Rhea shook her head once. It was the minimum cost of being allowed to have a future. The nursery compartment opened on the live feed. A human rescuer reached inside. For one breath, no signal changed. Then the green marker brightened. Hope entered the hall like light under a door. That was when Velmer gave the final order. The Theric reinforcements powered weapons. The human fleet opened its ports. And the Eidolon record hall began the official vote. The vote began while weapons charged. That was what the galaxy remembered afterward, because it revealed the shape of everyone inside the crisis. The Theric Imperium chose fire. Humanity chose restraint until restraint became the last shield between murder and rescue. The Eidolon record hall chose truth while a child's pulse flickered above the chamber, and the blue human fleet waited in silence. The Theric reinforcements fired first. 6 beams crossed the Greyward Reach, aimed not at human battleships but through the civilian recovery net, through hospital shields and mining anchors, toward the rescue lane where the nursery compartment had just been opened. The record hall captured every angle, every order stamp, every ignored warning. The Imperium had spent the proceeding claiming misunderstanding. Then, in front of the galaxy, it told the truth in light. The human fleet answered once. Not with annihilation, not with uncontrolled vengeance. A precise defensive strike cut the etheric beams apart before they touched the rescue corridor. Gravity lances folded enemy weapon spines inward without breaching cores. Engine locks disabled propulsion. Command relays collapsed. Targeting systems went blind. The attacking vessels went dark, alive, helpless, and unable to hurt anyone else. No one cheered. The silence was too large for celebration. The hall had watched a young species use power without cruelty, wrath without slaughter, and judgment without losing control. On the live feed, the rescuer emerged from the nursery wreck holding a small bundled child against his chest. Another rescuer caught the floating orange cloth bird and tucked it gently beneath the child's arm. The green marker stabilized. Only then did Rhea close her eyes. The vote completed in the next breath. The Eidolon judges accepted humanity's challenge unanimously. The Theric victory record was rejected and marked as deliberate falsification under crisis conditions. The Haven thread was reclassified as protected humanitarian movement. The strike was entered into permanent memory as an unlawful attack on civilian preservation infrastructure, followed by attempted witness erasure and a second live attack on rescue assets. Velmer's projection flickered as allied species withdrew connection privileges one by one. The Maruvi opened emergency medical routes to human survivors. The Elson Water League offered purification fleets. The Coram Station houses suspended Theric military docking rights. The Polari offered their oldest vault for the preservation of Haven thread records. Fear did not vanish. It changed direction. The galaxy was no longer afraid only of what the Imperium might do if challenged. It was afraid of what it would become if it stayed silent. Rhea repeated Earth's terms, not as a threat but as architecture. The Imperium would rebuild, disclose, return, fund, and acknowledge. It would not be erased. It would not be burned from the stars. Humanity did not require the extinction of its enemy. Humanity required its memory to stop lying. Velmer resisted until resistance became meaningless. His fleets were trapped. His record was broken. His allies were stepping away. His second attack had failed without forcing humanity to become the monster he had warned the galaxy to fear. When he accepted the framework, he did not bow. Rhea had not asked him to. Some victories were too serious for kneeling. The rescued child's name was recovered 3 hours later from a damaged nursery registry. Her name was Naya Pell. She was 7 years old. She had been traveling with her uncle from a collapsing shelter colony to a new frontier home beyond the Grey Ward Reach. Her uncle did not survive. Naya did. The record hall entered both names side by side. Not as numbers, not as evidence, but as people. Years later, when the Haven thread reopened, it did not return as a hidden refugee road. It returned brighter, wider, protected not by secrecy, but by witness. The restored corridor was renamed the Bright Ward Line, and on its first crossing, thousands of ships from hundreds of species flew beside the human convoy. Hospital carriers, school vessels, water haulers, agricultural freighters, Eidolon record craft, even Theric construction ships traveled at the rear, carrying material under public witness to rebuild what their empire had tried to erase. Rhea Darson stood on the observation deck of the lead vessel as the convoy crossed the place where the attack had begun. No victory anthem filled the glass. No war banner covered the stars. Only lights moved through the dark, one after another, steady and patient. Behind her, the Shelter Seed Mandate archived the final restoration entry. Ahead, children pressed their hands to the windows and watched the stars open. Humanity had not made the galaxy fear its anger that day. It had made the galaxy understand something far more enduring. Humans could lose ships, homes, routes, and lives beyond counting, but they would not surrender the names. They would build around them, fight for them, carry them forward, and when an empire tried to turn murder into history, humanity would arrive with memory in one hand, mercy in the other, and a fleet waiting quietly behind both.